Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Not a Greentext story, but not all the stories here are Greentext, so screw it. I typed all this out beforehand so people wouldn't possibly get antsy over reading it all at once. When I was younger, I was in that weird science fiction phase where I thought aliens were cool and wouldn't it be awesome if UFOs were real. One of my chores that I had to do was take the garbage out to the curb on the 2 nights before garbage day, and one of my favorite things to do would be to stargaze. This sort of thing was kind of rough to do, since I lived in the middle of a growing town and the light pollution made it difficult to see everything that I wanted to see. Sometimes I'd even yell up at the sky to see if the aliens could hear me. Yeah, I was a dumb kid. Anyway, one night, when I was 12 and had moved past my UFO, sci-fi, alien phase, I went to take the trash out. It was a night like any other night before it. The air was hot and humid because I live in Florida, of course, but I realized I hadn't stargazed post-trash takeout in a long time. So I turned my head to the sky, but I couldn't really see any stars, as it was a full moon and by this point light pollution was in full swing. Feeling nostalgic, I remember I yelled up at the sky to see if the aliens could hear me, and I regretted it the instant I yelled it. I felt this absolute feeling of dread, and that weird feeling that I was being watched. If you've ever had a dream where you were terrified of something and you felt like every step you took was extremely heavy and you couldn't escape, that's exactly what I felt, but I only remembered that feeling from dreams. This was like in real life, and probably even more terrifying, cause if you didn't escape the monster there was no waking up. I tried to take a step forward and barely managed it, and I remember falling forward onto my hands since I lost my balance, since my legs just wouldn't respond properly. I remember managing to push myself back to a stand, and when I looked up again there was this bright flash of light from out of nowhere, blinding me because my eyes were adjusted to the lack of light, and I felt this sensation like I was being moved. I remember that I felt like there was the passing of time, but my eyes couldn't adjust to the darkness. My legs still couldn't work, but I didn't feel like my feet were on solid concrete anymore. It's a difficult feeling to describe, like standing up while falling, but not actually falling, while still not actually being in contact with solid ground, but not exactly floating. It felt like an absence and a combination of all of things, and I have never felt a thing even remotely close to that in my life, and still haven't. Not long after that I heard my mother call for me, and the moment she did, my eyesight returned to me. I felt my feet back on the ground again, and my legs moved fine on their own. My mom was super pissed off at me, telling me that she'd been yelling at me for an hour, that I should have been in bed, usual parent to kid stuff. I remember happily and willingly going to bed after that. Even my mom thought that was weird, cause I was segueing into a kind of rebellious phase at the time. I never told my mom, dad, or even my sister about that night. The only person I told that whole situation to was a guy I met out of high school at one of my first jobs who claimed to be a UFO enthusiast, and he insisted that I was abducted, and that one day they'd come back for me. I didn't really think of it particularly seriously, but I realized that he was technically right, because that wasn't the only time in my life that had happened to me. When I was about 14, I joined the Boy Scouts and got up to 2nd class. The first year of Boy Scouts, we went out to Sand Hill Scout Reservation, basically a huge plot of land set aside for scouts to do scout stuff. Basically, it was a big excuse to make us eat shitty breakfast foods from out of a carton, box, and make us earn lots of badges in a short amount of time. Real stupid stuff in the grand scheme of things, but I loved it, cause by that point I'd forgotten all about the incident a handful of years before. My first year there was fairly uneventful, but my second year was when it happened again. I had just split up with some scouts from another troop to head back to my own camp, but we apparently picked the short straw when drawing lots because my camp was all the way in the back of all the other campgrounds. I was walking through the woods, and there was a huge clearing before another cusp of woods where our campground was, and I remember in spite of it being dark at the time with no moon in the sky, I couldn't see a single light. Which was strange, because every night had plenty of campfires, lanterns, all kinds of light sources lighting up every campsite, and they only put them out when it was really late, and the sun had just gone down. So I knew I had plenty of time to make it back to camp before getting yelled at by the scoutmaster. The pic is relevant. It's the map from Sand Hill's website and it doesn't seem to have changed a whole lot from when I went. Anyway, I had this really awful feeling of dread, and I got struck by this horrible sense of deja vu, like I'd felt that feeling before, and it almost immediately hit me, and I remembered specifically that event a few years before. I tried to run and this time I got about 5 or 6 steps before my legs locked up and I fell face first into the dirt. I remember that it didn't even really feel that painful, but that might have just been because I was terrified. No one was likely to find me out there because everyone else from my troop had gone back to camp and I was the last one out there like a complete schmuck. No one would have headed out in my direction for any real reason. I remember I managed to get to a stand, just like last time, but this time I heard brush shaking in the tree line not particularly far away, opposite side of the closest campground, which was a ways away anyway and doubtful they'd have heard me. I remember I tried to move away from it, but moving was impossible. There wasn't a bright flash this time, but I felt that weird sensation of being lifted again, and I was vaguely aware of the passage of time. Out in Sand Hill, it was basically pitch black dark, extremely minimal light pollution, and if you wandered at night away from the paved roads you only really had campfires from the campsites to tell you where you needed to be going. As I said before, it was nothing but pitch black, but I had my eyes open the whole time trying to spot something, anything. Blah. I should have mentioned that the red dot in the picture was where I guess I was coming off the access road. We were at campsite 12, circled in the picture, and the arrow is roughly the direction I traveled in. Also, I was sticking to a walking trail, since I didn't want to accidentally step on a snake, God forbid, which is why it seems a little odd that I didn't just beeline for my campsite. Next thing I know the sun's coming up, I haven't moved an inch from where I remember stopping, and I don't feel tired at all. Shaken, scared, wondering what happened to the past several hours, definitely, but I wasn't tired like I would have been if I had missed a full night's sleep. It was the most refreshed I can remember feeling in my life. The worst part was knowing that there was a significant chunk of my night, from sunset to sunrise, that I would never get back or know what happened to it. When I got back to camp, understandably, my scoutmaster yelled at me out, since they'd sent people to look for me, even walked down the trail I was on, but didn't see hide nor hair of me. They had most of the higher-up people from every troop there that week, and a lot of the staff, up all night looking for me, and then to them I just casually wandered up in the morning. I had to stay at the campsite and clean up all day, but I had people with me the whole time, which helped to calm my nerves. So, besides the guy from work, you're all about damn near the only people I've told this to, since I figure this sort of thing is something you read every day, and someone might care to read it. These events are mostly something I try to forget, but there are times when I revisit them against my will, like tonight, and I figure talking about it before bed should help.
B19. Still live at home with my parents. There is a large green belt that has a creek running through it behind my parents' place. Deep in the green belt lies a fire pit my brother, friends, and I set up under 2 large cedars. One night during a fire, friends and I decide to wander away from the fire pit into the dark. The night is chilly, rainy, and a slight fog lingers. We take one of our old mostly covered paths that runs along the creek. Shining my mag light every which way something catches my eye across the creek. It's a path-like opening that seems to dig through the trees and thick blackberry bushes into someone's property. A sudden chill of fear and excitement overwhelms me and most likely my friends. The decision to follow the path deeper into unknown territory is made and we search for a way across the creek. Further down the creek we find a sturdy fallen tree that lays from bank to bank. We all safely cross and make our way back upstream towards the opening. Everyone is cracking jokes to keep spirits high. Finally we reach the entrance. The 4 of us, including myself, that did not leave, climbed the bank and gathered at the foot of the trail. Peering down the path I notice the fog progressively gets denser and yet again I feel the spine-tingling sensation of fear. Before we take our first steps in, I turn my mag light off to avoid early detection. We head in. The path is nice, well maintained and lined with a fresh-smelling mulch/bark mix. The air is moist and the visibility is terrible with the fog. The first thing we come across is an open-bottomed flower box about 4 to 5 feet long and separated in the middle to form 2 sections. Someone names it Baby Graves and starts carrying it along with us. This is when things get strange. We reach a Y in the path and come to a stop. The fog is really dense but we can make out 2 signs stuck in the center of each split path. I switch on the mag light in preparation to read the signs that I already know state, "No trespassing." As I'm about to shine the light upward to the signs I recognize a pattern on the ground in the center of the path. It's a perfectly straight long line of mushrooms intersected by a perfectly straight short line of mushrooms. Across, I say out loud as I point it out to my friends. My friends stare in shock at how perfectly each mushroom is aligned. An upside-down mushroom cross, I say. As we moved in quietly towards the fungus display for a closer look, that's when we heard it. Something or someone was approaching us at a slow pace from up the right path. By the time someone says, "Do you guys hear that?" my brain was going to burst from fear. In my mind it's fight or flight, and to fight the unknown, the voiceless and unidentifiable, is not an option. I turn away from my friends and the Y in the path and start hauling ass like a big coward. My friends do the same almost a second after me. We stay close. We all make it to the foot of the path, but don't stop there. My friend who was carrying the flower box still has it on his shoulder and decides to sprint through the creek to the other side. The three of us rush to the log and cross the creek back to my path. We all make it back to my fire pit winded, confused, and mostly freaked out. The people who stayed behind want answers as to why we are out of breath and what the box thing is that my friend took. After telling an in-depth story of the events that happened like the one I have just told you, most of my friends wouldn't believe it. They wouldn't go see for themselves, which meant they believed it enough to fear going. Eventually the four of us that visited the dark path calmed down and started indulging in booze and beer. Later that night I took a picture of the fire with my broken cell phone just for kicks and got a slightly disturbing image. With what looks like a baby's face in the flame. It could just be a coincidence. To this day we still have fires and still have the baby graves stored under one of the benches. I am 23 now and still live at home.
Hey, I know I'm late to this thread, but I thought that I would deliver some green text that deals with my personal experience with a skinwalker. A little info about my area. Lenni Lenape Indians once occupied the land where my father lives in South New Jersey. Apparently my great-grandparents decided it was a great idea to mess up the land and disrespect it in any way possible. My grandmother said there might have been a small burial ground nearby her house. Family lived on one street. My first experience was when I was 12, at my father's house. Always outside, climbing trees, crawling through thick grass, and looking for bugs. Insanely curious child. Figure I would go exploring in the woods that my father told me not to. I don't give AF anymore. .jpg. While wandering, I came across a coyote carcass. The neck was bloody, and it seemed to be somewhat still living. I suddenly get a deep pang in my stomach when I hear something move in the woods. Run Forest Run. GIF. I get to my father and tell him that there was a dying coyote. He didn't believe me but followed me because I was so frantic. We get there and the body is gone. All that is left is a fur outline and some blood. I was completely terrified at this point and made my dad get out of there. Never went back. Fast forward to when I was 16. I had just gotten kicked out of my mother's house and decided to live with the old man, having forgotten about the instance with the coyote. The house always had a really bad and creepy vibe, like things were living in there and I was disturbing their space. Again, I was a fool. I don't give a F. .jpg. Go into the middle room one night, see something shaped like an egg, about the size of a 6-year-old. It was a shadow figure. Oh shit. .png. I knew it was watching me. I could feel it thinking about what to do with me. All I could do was run back into my room. And for the record, my dad's house is really shit tier. He dealt with major depression from the divorce and other mental illnesses. To be honest, he was a heavy drinker and was never quite right after his time in the military and dealing with my mentally ill foreign mother. Anyway, start noticing my father's behavior changing, becoming more perverted and drunk and depressed. No matter what I do, the old man won't cheer up. I pass by the room one night and see the figure again. I was tired of this by this point and decided to speak the blood of Jesus Christ. Mind you, I did not believe in God or Jesus, but I figured it wouldn't hurt if it worked. The shadow stood up. Oh shit. .gif. I slammed the door shut and ran into my room. Heard scratching along the bedroom wall that was right next to mine. Did not sleep for 2 days. This is where it gets real. Decide to drive to a convenience store to pick up some food. Look over towards the woods for some reason and saw it. It was tall, at least 7 or 8 feet tall, and its eyes bore a hole through me like nothing I could ever explain. It couldn't go into the street though, for some reason. I still don't understand it, even to this day, but it put me in overdrive and read up on preventative measures against demons. You see, I was raised by a woman who was crazy, believed in God, and protected her home from demons all the time with blessed salt. She also put some kind of ash in it. Get some salt from Mom and listen to how to put it down and what to say. Put salt along the perimeter of the house. Salt line in front of the door that has shadow creature. Do it to all the windowsills in my own room and my father's room. Still thought it was bull, but I changed my mind quickly that night when I went into my father's room because I forgot to salt his windowsill. Look out the window and see this face looking in. It looked kind of animalistic, hut white with red eyes. I could barely breathe because of fear. Then I watched this thing's enormous hand lift and press against the window. I will never forget the genuine fear that I felt that night. I threw salt in the window, and it jumped back into the dark. Dad and I live in the deep woods with no outside lampposts. Better to stargaze, run to the window, open and put salt down, slam it shut and hide in my room. All night I hear sticks being thrown at my room. Low growls, sounds like raccoons or cats fighting. After that night, the activity seemingly stopped. Then again, I moved out ASAP after all the shit I saw and begged my dad to get out of there. He still lives there, and I still stop by and salt once a year.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.